The Middle East is a region rich with culture, spirit, and history. Its people are brilliant, proud, and diverse, vibrant, and strong. But the incredible future awaiting this region is held at bay by bloodshed, ignorance, and terror. Vice President Pence will travel to the region in the coming days to reaffirm our commitment to work with partners throughout the Middle East to defeat radicalism that threatens the hopes and dreams of future generations. It is time for the many who desire peace to expel the extremists from their midst. It is time for all civilized nations and people to respond to disagreement with reasoned debate, not violence. And it is time for young and moderate voices all across the Middle East to claim for themselves a bright and beautiful future. So today, let us rededicate ourselves to a path of mutual understanding and respect. Let us rethink old assumptions and open our hearts and minds to possible and possibilities. And finally, I ask the leaders of the region, political and religious, Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Christian and Muslim, to join us in the noble quest for lasting peace. Thank you. God bless you. God bless Israel. God bless the Palestinians. And God bless the United States. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our people, the Palestinian people, inside Palestine and outside of Palestine, the steadfast people of Palestine, and our Arabic and Muslim nation, and all the free people of the world. We stand today at a very significant point in history for our Palestinian issue and the issue of Jerusalem. Our entire nation, the Muslim and Arab nations, are going through this together. After the decision, the unacceptable and oppressive decision that was taken by the American administration, with their supposed acceptance of Jerusalem as the capital of the so-called Zionist state. I here today, I do not want to talk about, the possible impact of these decisions or the coming impact of these decisions. This is going to require a great reaction from the politicians and from the analysts of different backgrounds. As for me, and in the name of the movement, the resistance movement of Hamas, and on behalf of the Palestinian people, I would like to give a final statement and a clear statement about this particular decision, which means the end of a political phase
from Jerusalem in the last few moments. Actually, just before we cut to this shot, we saw water cannon being deployed on the streets there. Obviously, it goes without saying that the situation is extremely tense, and tear gas canisters being fired as well as the authorities attempt to control any demonstrations. And our diplomatic correspondent, James Robbins, is with me in the studio. And James, as we watch these images, well, it seemed pretty inevitable that we would see scenes like this following President Trump's announcement, didn't it?
It did. It was foreshadowed in much of the international criticism of the president's unilateral decision on behalf of the United States to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, breaking ranks with 70 years of a very finely judged diplomatic response to the situation in the Middle East. Many countries, Saudi Arabia, seen as an ally of the United States, predicted exactly this, a violent response which they thought would be hugely disruptive to the peace process. Britain has been highly critical of the decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I think this was utterly predictable. The question really will be, I think, the scale of any violence, the scale of any protest. And so far, without being complacent, it's been relatively restrained.
To what extent do you think that is, James, so far, because other nations, allies of America, have criticised Donald Trump for this decision? Countries like Britain, like Saudi Arabia, as we mentioned, like France. To what extent are people in the Middle East, in the region, listening to those other voices and thinking, well, let's just, take a pause and see if we can control the situation without further violence?
I'm sure that those who are going to the streets are obviously listening to everything that's been said around the world and also by their own leaders in the region. It was no surprise that Ismail Haniyeh, on behalf of the Islamist group Hamas, would call for an intifada. That doesn't mean there will be an extraordinarily violent response. We should recognise that Hamas only speaks for a small number of people, and it's relatively weak at the moment as it tries to seek some sort of reconciliation with the other half of the Palestinian political world, that's to say Fatah, the Palestinian Authority. So Hamas was predictably going to do just this. We don't know what that will mean on the ground, but you're absolutely right. The scale of international condemnation may, to some people, be seen as some sort of legitimation of violent uprising, and therefore these days ahead will be very, very tense. Now, the United States itself, as the author of the policy, President Trump as the author of the change of policy, knew precisely where this could lead in the short to medium term, because after all, just as he was speaking last night, the State Department, the United States State Department, was issuing a warning to its own diplomats to avoid all but essential travel in the region. So the United States knew when it let this particular genie out of the bottle that there were real risks involved. But President Trump, of course, insists that it's in the long-term interests of a two-state solution, although most of his allies don't see it that way.
Yes, his Secretary of State Rex Tillerson just talking in the last short while about short-term pain for long-term gain, in his words, and also saying the president is simply carrying out the will of the American people. Well, he's carrying out the will of a certain section of the American people, I guess, and certainly appealing to his core base of support. But he is over